Welcome back. Well, to our next conversation. Now, recently, AfriInvest Research released its Nigerian telecommunication sector report. It's titled Traversing a Familiar Terrain. This report highlights the geopolitical and macroeconomic headwinds faced by both the global and domestic mobile network operators in the industry. Well, joining me to discuss this now is the author. That's Benedict Eguchukwu, an investment research and associate at AfriInvest West Africa Limited. Great to have you on the show. All right, so we see the report is titled Traversing a Familiar Terrain. Okay, can you tell me more about this title?
Okay, so basically, when you take a look at the title, what we actually did focus on was what happened in 2023. And we're able to tie the circumstances that befell the telecom sector back to also what happened in 2016. If you do recall, in 2016, we actually did have a recession as a result of declining global crude oil price, and this led to, poor country revenue and economic stability. And this also within 2016, what we also noticed was the flotation of the naira, and because of the devaluation of the naira currency, we saw a spike in inflation from an average of around 9% in 2015 to an average of around 15.62% in 2016. And what this caused for the mobile telecom operators at the time was an increase in capex, their operating expenses, as well as their net finance costs. Now, if you take a look at what happened in 2023, the same similar situation that took place in 2016 also reoccurred in 2023, only at a more diverse and devastating situation, in that we saw heightened inflation that was primarily observed because of the new market reform that was implemented by the new administration, that is administration in May 2023. And what we noticed was that when the fuel subsidy was removed, as well as the collapse of the I&E window to the NAFEM rate and the introduction of the willing buyer, willing selling model, we noticed a 49.1%, if I recall correctly, unfavorable movement in the exchange rate currency from a close of 461.50 kobo at the end of 2022 to 907 naira 11 kobo at the end of 2023. And this actually underpinned the upward pressure in the cost of doing business, not just within the Nigerian and the telecom space, but also the Nigerian economy. And in particular, capex, opex, and finance costs actually surged, which with the FX losses as well. So that's actually what, spiraled, or shall I say, spurred the tide to traversing a familiar terrain.
Yeah, I guess quite familiar there. But in the global space, what can you tell us about performance of the telecom industry, especially, among the MNOs?
So similar to what we saw in the global economy on a broad scale with the moderation in global growth output, the same thing also happened within the global telecommunication space, as we noticed that, although we saw an increase of about 10% year on year compared to what we saw in 2022 of about 15.3%, we actually did see a moderation. Now, if you take into consideration the global telecommunication industry space, there are three key categories. We have the direct, which makes up the mobile ecosystem, the indirect, as well as the productivity gain. For a couple of years now, productivity gains continue to drive growth in the global telecommunication space, although it declined last year by 1.1% to around $3.5 trillion. And then if you take a look at the indirect space, it actually grew by about 35.3% year on year to around $690 billion. And then if you take a look at the direct, which is the mobile ecosystem, it further breaks it down into three key areas. The mobile network operators also have the infrastructure services and also have content. Now, if you take a look at that space, you find out that of all three components, the mobile network operators actually struggle to turn out much more revenue in the previous year. For the infrastructure and equipment and content and services, what we actually saw was a 71.2% year-on-year increase. But for mobile network operators, we only saw a mere 1.5% year-on-year increase, around 660 billion naira. And this was just as a result of the mobile saturation in high income economy, the high investment costs, spectrum availability, the cost of devices soared up, and then we also had some poor price tariffs, and then competition from over-the-top services as well.
Right, and back here, I bringing it back home. Some of us are having to deal with, a lot of drop calls at this time. the data services, they don't seem really stable, at this time. Talk to us about this. Is it due to the macroeconomic headwinds these companies are having to deal with?
Yes, exactly. That is actually correct, because if you look back in 2023, what we noticed was that inflation affected pretty much every single industry. There was no industry that was spared. And in particular, the telecommunication industry was hit by the crash course episode of Q1 2023, before subsidy removal, like I already mentioned, and the FX liberalization. All of this actually did affect the domestic space. And because of this, what we noticed was just an 8.9% year-on-year increase compared to the 10.7% increase we saw in 2022. And then this growth that we actually saw was because of, the moderation we saw in the growth was because of the upcoming FX losses that was experienced, as well as some security concerns when it comes to the vandalism and theft of telecommunication infrastructures. And the one we also saw recently earlier this year, which had to do with the cables underneath the international oceans. So all of this actually make things quite difficult for telecommunicator operators to actually operate efficiently within the ecosystem.
And gladly, I guess they've been able to solve those under cable issues at this time. They did release a statement earlier, I think it was sometime earlier in the week. But
yes,
we know the Buhari administration unveiled the Nigerian National Broadband Plan that NNBP is expected to run between 2020 and 2025. But less than 2 years left at this point. What have we achieved so far with the plan?
Okay, just to give a little bit of recap, the plan, that is the Nigerian National Broadband Plan, was actually an upgraded version of the 2013 plan, which expired sometime in 2018. And this was introduced in 2019 to carry on towards 2020 to 2025. And its purpose was just to accelerate the digital inclusion, economic growth, and social development through improved broadband connectivity. Now, if we take a look at where we were at the end of 2023, at the time, broadband subscription actually rose by 4.8% year-on-year to about 94.8 million subscribers, and that actually represents 43.7% penetration rate. But looking at the data that came out for Q1 2024, what we've noticed is that the 94.8 million subscription rate we registered at the end of the year last year actually has fallen again to 94.4 million as at the end of Q1 2024. And this actually reflects a penetration of about 43.5%. Now, what this suggests is that because the target currently is 70% for the year 2025, and you can see that there's a whole lot of gaps still left. And the reason behind this is just the inadequate infrastructure development that we'll be facing currently in the country, the funding constraints, the regulatory bottlenecks, like the taxes for cybersecurity attacks that we've been experiencing. All of these have actually impacted the telecommunication sector, as well as the NCC's efforts in driving the NNBP plan moving forward. But that is not to say that there's not been a lot of progress being made since 2018 up until this point. It's just that currently, as we speak, if you look at the target of 2025, it may be possible to hit that 70% margin.
All right, let's look at some of the performances now of the listed telecom companies. We see MTN, Airtel Africa, both posting profit after loss between about 137 billion and 63 million dollars. And definitely, we know this devaluation issue keeps impacting these companies, and we keep seeing it in the results. Talk to me about these numbers.
So if we take a look at MTN's financials for 2023, what we did see is that they were able to actually perform in a good position when it comes to the top line. They had a growth of about 22.7%. When we take a look at their OPEX and net finance costs, we saw a surge of about 3.2% year-on-year for OPEX. And then when it comes to net finance costs, we actually saw a surge of about 341.9%, about 951.5 billion, which was actually the underlying factor that led to the loss before and after taxes. And if you take a look at that 951.5 billion naira, you find out that 740.4 billion of that was actually FS loss, while the remaining 236.9 billion was from finance costs. And this actually speaks to the devaluation, the naira devaluation, and its effect on the telecom operators, specifically MTN for 2023. And it only gets worse because in their Q1 2024 numbers, we did see a much better performance on their top line with a growth of about 32.5% year on year. But when you come back down to the OPEX as well as net finance costs, what we actually did see was net finance costs soared by about 1,600% thereabouts. And the FX loss accounted for about 87.5% of the total number. That was around 654.4 billion naira. And this actually brought to a total loss of around 392.7 billion. Now, earlier in the year, MTN had actually, kicked off a plan to see how they could help the current situation as well as their balance sheet positioning. And some of the things that they've highlighted moving forward to ensure that they're able to recover from the devastating situation they find themselves is actually to get an approval for tariff increase, as well as optimize their CapEx and review existing tower lease contract while trying to reduce their FX exposure, especially in terms of letters of credit. And as at Q1 2024, what we have noticed that they have actually made a breakthrough in that part. And then for Airtel, in their full year 2024 result, given that their financial runs from March to April, what we noticed was their across board, they were impacted heavily by the naira devaluation, given that they operate across 14 different countries. However, Nigeria was one which pulled the country and the company a little bit downward, given that it composes of it makes up about 30% of its entire revenue system. And because of that, we saw revenue fall by about 5.3% year on year. And then in terms of the exchange rate that was applied, given in the fiscal period it runs in, the exchange rate compared to MTN, which had a 907 naira devaluation, and Airtel actually had 1,303 naira devaluation. And this actually what led to the 63 million loss we registered at the end of the year for Airtel. Now, moving forward, we actually believe that Airtel is in a much better position compared to MTN, given its strong balance sheet position as well as cash and liquidity situation to actually sustain itself across the market. However, looking at what we've been seeing in the exchange rate, at least in the second quarter, in the first quarter, we noticed exchange rate fell to about 1,600 thereabout, and as of Tuesday, we noticed exchange rate was already around 1,520 naira, which actually spells more disaster for the telecommunication players within the space.
Yeah, definitely. The volatility in the FX market is definitely telling at this time. But, they've been clamoring for, tariff increases at this point. And I'm wondering if the regulator is going to allow, the telcos increase tariffs, at some point, if they'll have to bow to pressure. But in a few words, just tell me what you're expecting.
So it will be quite difficult given, the current state of the economy at the moment. I mean, this was something that was tried back in 2016. And given that consumer spending is already pressured at the moment, it would not really make sense for operators to want to increase tariff and, put more pressure on the consumer side of the scale. But at the same time, if the mobile telecommunicator operators cannot get this tariff approved, it may actually be quite difficult for them to be able to turn out that margin that is required for their investors.
Right, we'll keep tracking that. Thank you so much, Benedict Eguchukwu, Research Associate at Afrinvest West Africa Limited. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Adam.